Rachel Holt for Nesson.com, here with DJ Foster of Fox Sports. DJ, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So let's wrap up a big Week 5 that we just had. And one of the guys I want to ask you about in particular that you can still find on the waiver wire that had a big performance is Brian Hoyer, a name that we wouldn't necessarily think we would be saying at this point in the season. But a lot of quarterbacks run buys in Week 5, and if you started Hoyer, it paid off. He had nearly 400 passing yards. So my first question to you, DJ, is he someone that we can look at as a viable option at quarterback?
I think so, at least for one more week. The matchup against Indy, obviously they're going to inflate the stats because the Colts' pass defense is a mess. But the good news for Hoyer streamers are you can keep trotting him out. You have one more week with them. They play Jacksonville this week, who has an equally bad pass defense. That game is projected to be pretty high scoring. So, again, you think Hoyer could probably have a good game this week. Just don't get too attached. Coming up on the schedule, Week 7, he plays Green Bay. Week 8 plays Minnesota, and then they have a bye. So I would play Hoyer one more week and then start looking elsewhere for the rest of the season.
In terms of other guys on the waiver wire that had a great Week 5, who are the names?
Other guys on the waiver wire that you were able to pick up last week, Cameron Meredith. Probably not a lot of people went out and got him, but he was the guy that Hoyer was looking for the most with Kevin White out for probably the rest of the season here. Meredith steps into a pretty big role. Alshon Jeffrey has been known to have injury problems as well, some soft tissue ailments in the past. So Meredith is going to be a big part of this passing game going forward. And if you took a gamble on him, probably only about 5% of people in your league did. But he, contributed big-time fantasy stats last week.
Okay, and your colleague, Ryan Fowler, actually pointed this out, that Week 6 is kind of the halfway point in a lot of fantasy football leagues. Depending on when your playoffs are, this is the time when it's make or break for a lot of people. Going off of that, assessing everything so far, who's been your biggest surprise or biggest breakout performances?
So the big surprise is just based on average draft position, which is, the guys that you're not taking in the top, 7, 8 rounds or so. LeGarrette Blount has been one of the best running backs in the league. He's a guy I avoided in every league just because he doesn't catch the ball. He's getting older. He has durability issues. But it hasn't mattered so far. He's been really good all season. You'd expect it to calm down a little bit with Tom Brady back, but he's been a steal. DeMarco Murray, you're able to get him in the 4th or 5th round, and he's putting up top running back numbers. Going into Week 5, he was the leading point scorer at running back through the first 4 weeks. A guy that not a lot of people were drafting very high. We're thinking, okay, Derrick Henry's probably going to steal some carries from him. That just hasn't been the case. So those are two of my big steals so far. Marvin Jones probably deserves some mentioning as well. He just kind of looks like Calvin Johnson out there, which not a lot of people expected, but he's filled his shoes pretty admirably.
In terms of the biggest buffs, I know Odell Beckham Jr. is frequently a name that you would consider in this category. He finally scored his first touchdown in Week 5, but overall not putting up the point production that we all expected him to this year. Des Bryant, he hasn't been producing. Of course, he's now dealing with an injury. Anyone else that you would consider to be on that list of guys who we thought was going to have a great year and they haven't done that yet?
Yeah, for the record, I do think Odell Beckham is on his way back. The target share that he's getting, the amount of looks he's getting per game is very similar to what it was last year. So I think he's going to be just fine. He's a great buy low opportunity if your owner's freaking out, although that may have passed last week once he got the touchdown. The guy that I think that is really disappointed so far has been Todd Gurley. He's barely averaging 3 yards a carry this season. He's had to grind for absolutely everything. Nothing has come easy. A lot of people expected, to have a similar year that he had last year or even improve in a lot of drafts. He was the first running back taken off the board, but he just hasn't performed. He's not an RB1 right now. He's more of an RB2. So he's been a huge disappointment in my mind. And then the other guy, if you drafted him, you're probably screaming at me right now to talk about him. Golden Tate. Golden Tate has been a complete and total bust. He was a 5th, 6th-round pick in a lot of drafts. Going into Week 5, he was 95th in fantasy points scored by receivers. He's been barely playable. There's really no help in sight. Anquan Bolden has kind of supplanted him as the second receiver behind Marvin Jones. Golden Tate, you're fine cutting him in most leagues, which is insane for a guy who's been completely healthy but just hasn't been getting the targets and the looks that he used to get.
In terms of guys that we can find on the waiver wire for this week, are there any names in particular that you're looking at?
Yeah, I'm looking at a few different guys. Jalen Richard in Oakland. If Latavius Murray is still a little banged up and for some reason he has to sit out again, I like Jalen Richard a lot. I know they're splitting carries in Oakland, and it's a little messy, but he's been one of the most productive fantasy running backs per touch so far this season. I think he will have another good week with San Diego on tap. They're coming on a short week here. I don't know if Latavius Murray is going to play in this one. If he doesn't, I really like Jalen Richard quite a lot to have a big game. Sammy Coates is another guy, obviously, that everyone's looking at after his big week. He's got another good matchup against Miami this week. Being the number 2 receiver with Antonio Brown drawing so much attention, and now Le'Veon Bell coming out of the backfield and drawing a ton of attention as well. It's a good fantasy spot to be in. So Sammy Coates would probably be my top receiver. I'm looking at Devontae Booker, James Starks if Eddie Lacy is out, and maybe Jalen Richard if Latavius Murray is out as well.
Okay, you mentioned Latavius Murray. He's one of the guys that may be returning from injury this week along with another list. We're not entirely sure, but it does look like he should be back from that toe injury. We have Broncos quarterback Trevor Siemian should be able to return. Running back Jonathan Stewart should be able to return. And then Cody Kessler should be back for Sunday's game. Any reservations about starting any of these guys I mentioned if they are, in fact, back in action this week?
Yeah, Murray, I have some few hesitations about starting him just because it's another name to add to the running back rotation there. Although the matchup is right, if you are a Murray owner, you're probably going to play him. The other guy, Simeon, I think you can trot out if you're in the position where you have to trot out Trevor Simeon. He's not a guy that I would love to play, but if he's on your roster and he's your starting quarterback, you go ahead and put him out there. I think he'll be ready to go. Jonathan Stewart is a guy that I'd have a really hard time playing. His upside is limited by Cam Newton coming back, stealing goal line carries. Standard league players, it's hard to really trot him out. PPR, same thing. Fozzie Whitaker has taken on more of a passing game role, and Cameron Artis-Payne looked really good. So I wouldn't be surprised if they eased Stewart back in. So I want to at least see what his workload looks like before I start Jonathan Stewart.
As far as survivor picks go, a lot of people last week were going for the statement pick with the pass over the Browns. As far as Week 6 picks, is there a definitive matchup that you're looking at that you can feel pretty comfortable selecting a team to win?
Yeah, it's tough, and I think this week is the week that's going to catch a lot of people because I feel like there's a lot of trap games. Good teams maybe going on the road. I know you like Pittsburgh this week, right?
Yes, I like Pittsburgh, and then you do too.
I do, yeah. I like Pittsburgh. Even though it's on the road in Miami, I typically tend to avoid survivor picks on the road, but the Dolphins have been so terrible, and Pittsburgh is firing on all cylinders right now. The other team, if you already used Pittsburgh, that I would look at, and this is probably the only situation you'll be able to use them in all year, it's a little risky, but maybe you look at Tennessee at home against the Cleveland Browns, given Cleveland's quarterback situation, the health with Kessler, and with Marcus Mariota coming off a game where he just scored 4 touchdowns and maybe is finally starting to turn it on, Tennessee feels like a pretty good pick if you want to use a team that you're not going to use ever again.
This week moving forward, there's buys to keep in mind. So the Vikings and the Bucs are off this week. Any other advice you would give people going into Week 6?
In Week 6, it's a really tricky time. You got a bunch of guys who are returning from injury who might not be playing full workload. Tyler Eifert is supposed to be back finally for the Bengals. Jamal Charles should have his workload ramped up a little bit. So there's a bunch of guys who are finally coming back. You may be excited to get these big names that you spent a high draft pick on in your lineup. My advice is wait. You wait 1 week. It's sort of a win-win situation. If he goes off for 25 points, yeah, you're upset that you didn't put him in your lineup. But the good news is he's healthy enough to score 25 points, and you can play him the rest of the season now. There's nothing worse than trotting out a guy who's just coming off an injury, say like Jamal Charles in his debut against the Steelers, gets 2 carries, puts up 1.4 fantasy points, and kills your week. So my advice for guys coming back off the injuries, we haven't seen their workloads, wait 1 week, and then come back the next week and play him if he has a good week.
Proceed with caution. I agree. Great advice. So last question for you, DJ, is where can we find more of your stuff?
All right, you can find me at foxsports.com/fantasy. That's where we put all of our fantasy advice, and you can follow me on Twitter at foxsportsbuster.
Thank you so much. Look forward to using your advice this week, and we'll be talking to you soon.